Some people earn more money every year and still wake up with quiet financial anxiety. Others move through uncertain times with surprising calm, even without living extravagantly. That difference is rarely visible from the outside. Two people can have similar incomes, similar careers, even similar lifestyles, yet one constantly feels behind, while the other feels emotionally steady. One checks their bank account with tension before buying groceries. The other sleeps peacefully because money no longer controls their sense of safety. And the deeper reason often has very little to do with math. For many people, financial stress is not just about bills or income. It is tied to identity, to comparison, to the fear of losing status, falling behind, or not being enough in a culture that constantly tells people to upgrade their lives. Some spend money to feel admired. Others spend it trying to escape insecurity for a few brief moments. But the relief rarely lasts. The people who rarely worry about money are not always the wealthiest in the room. Often, they simply developed a different emotional relationship with money itself. They use money less for performance and more for protection, less for appearance and more for peace. Because eventually, financially calm people realize something most of the world never slows down long enough to understand. The greatest financial advantage may not be wealth itself, but the ability to remain emotionally stable around money. For many people, financial anxiety has become so normal that they no longer recognize it as anxiety at all. It hides inside ordinary routines. Checking a banking app before going to sleep, feeling a wave of tension after opening an email, quietly calculating how long savings would last if something unexpected happened. Even people earning respectable incomes often move through life carrying an invisible pressure that never fully turns off. Modern culture reinforces this constantly. People are surrounded by lifestyles designed to make ordinary life feel insufficient. Every scroll through social media exposes another luxury vacation, another perfectly designed home, another version of success that appears effortless from the outside. Over time, this creates a subtle psychological effect. People stop measuring their lives against their actual needs and begin measuring them against performances. And performances are impossible to keep up with because they are built to provoke desire, not peace. Lifestyle inflation quietly becomes emotional inflation. A salary increase no longer creates security because expectations rise alongside it. A nicer car feels exciting for a few months, then slowly becomes the new baseline. The same thing happens with homes, restaurants, clothing, and experiences. People chase the emotional high of feeling successful, but the feeling fades quickly, leaving them dependent on the next purchase to recreate it. What makes this exhausting is that much of it is emotional rather than financial. Many purchases are attempts to soothe insecurity, loneliness, or comparison. Someone upgrades their apartment not because the old one failed them, but because they no longer want to feel behind. Someone buys luxury items to signal competence in environments where they secretly feel uncertain. Money becomes deeply connected to identity, which means every financial decision starts carrying emotional weight. This is why financial stress often persists even when income rises. A person can earn 6 figures and still feel internally unstable if their lifestyle depends on constant validation. Some people quietly live with enormous debt while projecting success outwardly. Others spend years trapped in careers they dislike because their image has become too expensive to maintain. And beneath the appearance of success is often a nervous system that never truly rests. Financial instability changes daily psychology in subtle ways. It makes people impatient, reactive, hyper-aware of potential loss. It becomes difficult to enjoy free time because part of the mind is always calculating risk. Even simple purchases can trigger guilt or overthinking. Some people cannot relax at dinner because they are mentally negotiating future expenses while pretending everything is fine. And this is where the psychology quietly changes. The people who rarely worry about money usually relate to it differently at an emotional level. One of the first shifts is that they stop tying self-worth to visible success. They no longer need every achievement to be publicly recognizable. Their confidence does not depend on appearing impressive to strangers. There is something emotionally freeing about people who no longer feel pressured to look successful. They do not chase endless upgrades to prove they are progressing in life. They understand that insecurity is expensive because insecurity constantly asks for external confirmation. A person who doubts their worth can spend endlessly trying to repair that feeling through appearance. Financially peaceful people often step away from that cycle entirely. They stop using money as a tool for identity construction and begin using it as protection for their future peace. Their choices become quieter, more intentional. They care less about symbolic status and more about emotional sustainability. This changes how they move through the world. They are less reactive to trends, because trends no longer define their sense of value. They can tolerate simplicity without feeling diminished by it. A modest restaurant does not threaten their identity. An older car does not embarrass them. They are emotionally detached from the need to constantly signal importance. And when people stop buying identity, they begin buying freedom. One of the deepest differences between financially anxious people and financially peaceful people is the difference between stimulation and stability. Modern consumer culture rewards stimulation. It teaches people to chase novelty, excitement, and emotional highs through spending. But stimulation is temporary by design. It fades quickly, which is why people often find themselves repeating the cycle over and over again. Financially calm people tend to value something less exciting but far more powerful. Predictability, margin, emotional breathing room. They do not necessarily live without luxury, but they rarely build lives dependent on constant emotional stimulation. Their decisions are slower, less impulsive. They are willing to tolerate delayed gratification because they understand what instability costs psychologically. There is often an invisible discipline behind this calm. Not dramatic discipline, but quiet consistency repeated over years. They avoid financial decisions made during emotional highs or emotional lows. They resist building lifestyles that trap them into permanent pressure. They leave room for uncertainty because life eventually becomes uncertain for everyone. What looks boring from the outside often creates extraordinary peace internally. The ability to save consistently, the ability to avoid emotional spending, the ability to walk away from unnecessary status competition. These habits rarely attract attention, but they gradually create lives with less panic and more flexibility. Peace is often built through boring consistency. And consistency quietly changes the way people experience life. Financially peaceful people usually think in decades instead of moments. They are less interested in maximizing immediate appearance and more interested in protecting long-term optionality. This changes the emotional rhythm of their lives. Instead of asking, "What will make me feel successful today?" they begin asking, "What kind of life will this decision create years from now?" Emotionally reactive people often optimize for short-term feelings. They spend to relieve stress, prove progress, or keep pace socially. But people who think long-term become more comfortable with restraint because they understand that every impulsive decision narrows future freedom. This is why some high earners continue living modestly even when they could easily afford more visible luxury. From the outside, their behavior may seem unnecessarily restrained, but internally, they are protecting something more valuable than appearance. They are protecting flexibility, the ability to choose where they work, where they live, how they spend their time, and whom they depend on. True wealth often remains invisible during the building phase. Quietly wealthy people frequently appear ordinary because their lives are designed around durability rather than display. They are less concerned with proving success in the present because they are thinking beyond the emotional demands of the moment. The calmest people financially are often the least interested in appearing rich. And over time, that calm changes daily life in ways most people underestimate. Financial security reduces emotional noise. People with financial peace often experience life more slowly because they are less consumed by constant mental urgency. There is less panic around unexpected expenses, less comparison, fewer decisions made from desperation. What they gain is not simply purchasing power, but emotional space. Space to think clearly. Space to leave environments that damage their mental health. Space to tolerate uncertainty without collapsing emotionally. This is why financially peaceful people often appear calmer during economic instability. Their stability is not entirely dependent on appearances or external approval. Privacy also becomes more valuable. Many quietly wealthy people deliberately avoid drawing attention to themselves because attention creates pressure. Once a lifestyle becomes public performance, it often begins controlling the person maintaining it. Financially peaceful individuals usually prefer internal peace over external admiration. Eventually, luxury itself starts changing shape psychologically. Instead of associating luxury with excess, they begin associating it with quiet, a peaceful morning, an unhurried schedule, the ability to say no without fear. Emotional quiet becomes more valuable than visible consumption. And eventually, money stops being a source of emotional chaos. The deeper truth is that people who never worry about money are often not fearless because they are wealthy. They are calm because fear no longer controls their behavior. Fear drives many financial decisions in modern life. Fear of falling behind, fear of appearing unsuccessful, fear of instability, fear of not mattering. Financially grounded people tend to tolerate simplicity better because simplicity no longer threatens their identity. They do not need constant upgrades to reassure themselves emotionally. Their confidence is built through preparation, patience, and internal stability rather than appearance. This creates a very different relationship with consumption. People who fear less usually spend less emotionally. They do not constantly seek relief through purchases because their sense of self is less dependent on external symbols. Quiet confidence replaces financial performance. And the real difference is not what they own, but what no longer controls them. At some point, many financially peaceful people go through a subtle internal transformation. They stop chasing the feeling of finally enough through external achievement. Instead, they begin building emotional stability itself. Wealth becomes less connected to status and more connected to autonomy. This changes behavior in surprisingly simple ways. They think slower, compare less, spend more intentionally. They define success privately instead of socially. What other people are doing becomes less emotionally relevant because their lives are no longer built around performance. Many eventually realize they were never truly chasing luxury. What they wanted was relief from insecurity, safety, dignity, emotional calm. Luxury simply became the symbolic language they used to pursue those feelings. Emotional maturity changes financial behavior quietly but profoundly. Restraint begins to feel empowering instead of restrictive. Simplicity feels calming rather than embarrassing. Privacy starts feeling luxurious because privacy protects peace. And perhaps this is the most invisible form of wealth of all. Not money itself, but the ability to remain emotionally steady around money. The ability to live without constant fear, comparison, or performance. Once someone experiences that kind of peace, they rarely want to return to financial performance. There is a quiet difference between people who spend their lives chasing financial relief and those who already carry a sense of calm around money. And that difference is rarely visible on the surface. Some people earn more every year yet remain emotionally restless, always worried that something could disappear, that they could fall behind, that their lifestyle might collapse if life becomes uncertain. Others live far more quietly, but move through the world with a steadiness that feels almost untouchable. Not because they have perfect lives, but because their sense of safety no longer depends entirely on appearances. This is why financial peace is deeply psychological before it is financial. True wealth is often less about possessing more and more about fearing less. Less fear of judgment. Less fear of instability. Less fear of not looking successful enough to matter. Over time, the most valuable forms of wealth become invisible. The ability to sleep peacefully, the freedom to slow down, the clarity to make decisions without panic, the emotional space to enjoy life without constantly performing it for other people. And perhaps that is the real reason some people never seem worried about money. It is not always because they have the most. Often, it is because they no longer need money to protect their identity. Real wealth may simply be the ability to live without constant fear of losing what you have.